So I wanted to get a couple ideas out of my head, and the best way that I thought I could do that was recording them audibly, because they're story ideas, but I suck as a writer, and I don't have any artistic talent at the moment. Both of those things I could fix, but I don't want to. I'm way too lazy for that. Super unmotivated. I can barely bring myself to do this even. But we're gonna try our best to explain ourselves, because I've had this idea since I was in grade 9, at least, back when I was 14, 15, around there. I've had this idea. Well, actually, it was even before that, because the original concept for it was Summon Night Swordcraft Story, which GBA game from ancient times. I think I got that game back in, I want to say, like 2005. I remember playing it a lot back in grade 7, and ever since I played that game, I've always been fascinated with the idea of summons and summoning magic, specifically in relation to having the summon as a partner rather than, like, summoning hordes of demons, And for my story in particular, I ended up borrowing a lot of ideas because the magic system is 4-element based, and the types of summons I ended up going are also 4 races. They don't need to correspond with an element, but they usually do. And that sort of ties back into Swordcraft Story, which, as I talk about it, I'll mention more. But the first thing that I want to get out of the way is location, where the story takes place. I want to talk a little bit about that, so let's do that. I have all the time in the world. So the actual location of the story doesn't particularly matter very much, mostly because lots of my elements could be interchangeable with anything, and I feel like, with the exception of 2 specific locations, lots of the areas are interchangeable. Generally, whenever I think about the story, I usually imagine a sort of steam-based, not quite steampunk, but like brick and lots of pipes, that sort of architecture. So that sort of city look on top of just endless ocean, like it's 300 kilometers out at sea, that kind of thing. So it's like a port city with the ability to grow as much as it can lay its base. The only important structure in this town would end up being the monolithic tower, which also happened to be in Swordcraft Story. It's just a large tower with like 100 floors, maybe even more, who knows. Very like ornate. Some floors just have like nice stained glass, but keeping the feel of like pipes and brick. I was gonna say it's completely closed off so that water can't get in, but like obviously there will be verandas, because the building itself, the 100-story building, is more like a royalty castle. It's just like a skyscraper, but it's host to royalty. I say royalty. Royalty is like a loose thing, because like the only important people that I like have written down in the story are the priestesses. Is that how you say that? Specifically the Priestess of Wind, although there is a priestess for every element. The only one that is important to the story is the Priestess of Wind, although I could see any of the other ones being mentioned at any point, because they're important, because the main role of the priestess is to communicate with a leader of the spirit world, of which there would be 4. I like working in 4s, can you tell? So the Priestess of Wind is usually in contact with the King of Beasts. The other 4 races I should mention real quick, because it'll be pretty obvious, is the demons, the fairies, and the machines. You could call the machines like Machina or any like fancy word, but they're robots. I'm kind of debating on whether they should be like just robots, or if they should be androids, or any classification of metallic beings or partially metallic beings. I think ultimately it won't really matter, because there's only one that actually shows up in the story, and he's supposed to be like entirely mechanical. We'll get to that. In terms of how magic works in this universe, it's quite, I wouldn't say unique, but I've never really seen it done before in many other medias. Although it is a little bit cliche, but here's how it goes from the perspective of a person growing up in this world. So everybody can use magic to some extent, but the only reason that anybody can use magic is because of jewelry. Specifically, like when you have a piece of jewelry for a long time, you end up forming a bond with the jewelry, and that bond is what allows you connection to the spirit realm where magic actually comes from. So usually either your parents give you a ring or a necklace or an earring like when you're born, or at a certain age. It could be like 5 years old, and by the time that you're 10, 15, you'll be able to cast minor magic. As you age, you're capable of using better magic, and usually by the time that you're 20 or 30, you generally can use some pretty decent magic. The other part of growing up in magic-based society is also the summoning ritual. Generally, it's only done with people who can afford it. It's a materials thing. It's not necessarily like you're paying somebody for it, although it usually is overseen by someone of a higher magic potential. So at an appropriate age, usually when you're capable of making decisions on your own, in some parts of the world 13, in some parts of the world 18, but usually at that age that society deems you responsible for your own actions, you are capable of performing a summon ritual, which costs, a quite fair bit of coin. Not everybody can do it. The materials are either rare or being withheld by somebody for, a good price. Kudos to them if they're holding it back. I haven't actually decided. It's inconsequential. And whenever you do summon a summoned spirit, you already kind of have an affinity towards a specific element: fire, water, thunder, and wind. So you're already acclimated to one of those. And generally, when you summon a monster, they are aligned to your element. In the case of our main character, spoilers, he's fire-based, and he pulls a demon because demons and fire. If you can't tell, demons and fire, fairies and water, beasts and wind, electricity, and machine. I'll get this out of the way right now. There's 2 more elements, but nobody's specifically aspected to them, and they've only ever appeared in history like twice, one each. That's light and dark. There is an alternate version of this story where darkness is involved, but for the sake of what we're doing, you never see those 2 elements. I'll talk about the alternate version of this story some other time. But generally, that's all you really need for groundwork. We covered the elements, the summons, the kind of world. We covered all those things. I'm not very good at character writing. In fact, I don't even know what character writing is. I'm also really bad with names, both remembering them and giving them. I borrowed my name from the Zoroastrian god. So, I'm not super original. I think for the most part, when referring to characters, I'll give them a letter designation. But really, it kind of doesn't matter. Again, names are interchangeable. Lots of my ideas are interchangeable, especially just character names. I never know what to call them. And next we'll talk about the actual story and how it goes along. Addendum number 1. I forgot to talk about the relationship between magic and feelings. Feelings act as a sort of modifier to a magic, in that it can influence magic to become stronger or change the magic in some fashion. Specifically, for most elements, there's sort of a second stage or an alteration to the magic that is crucial in some cases. The best example of which would be fire. When you're experiencing feelings of anger or pride or love, typically what happens to fire magic is it increases in intensity and, in some cases, actually becomes an entirely different element. In this case, we're talking about plasma, which, as everybody knows, is hotter than fire, of course. The other notable example is for water. Feelings of isolation, sometimes sadness, influences water to to become ice. Feelings of excitement and generally happy electric-like feelings will make electricity more intense as well, but also unlock the ability for magnetism. And for wind, the key difference is calmness, because in most situations wind is used as either offensive or supportive types of magic. In this case, we have wind is sort of a combination of being able to push with a lot of force and slice. The more focus you obtain is how sharp the wind could be, and how calm you are can influence the amount of wind that you can push, if that makes some sort of sense.